The Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, painted by Leonardo da Vinci, is probably the most famous and valuable painting in the world. Specialists from the auction house Christie's say that if it were ever put up for sale, the value of this work of art would exceed $1 billion for the first time in history, and that would make it the most expensive object that has ever existed on our planet. By comparison, the cost of a Soyuz spacecraft is about $20 million, and the Mona Lisa is worth the same as 50 spacecraft. The face of the Mona Lisa is the most famous and reproduced in history. 80% of visitors to the Louvre come especially to see it, and the Louvre receives 10 million visitors a year. That is equivalent to the population of Austria, Israel, or Belarus. Why is this painting so famous? How did it become a superstar of the art world? And why is it worth so much money? You have probably been told that it is all due to the enigmatic smile of the Gioconda or to the genius of the great Leonardo da Vinci, but that is not entirely true. In reality, the reason for the colossal fame of the Gioconda is something else. This is the story of perhaps the most notorious and incredible crime ever committed in the world. This is the story of a perfect storm when many factors converged at a single point and created an information storm that swept around the world and turned the Mona Lisa into the ultimate star. In 1911, the Mona Lisa fell victim to an almost impossible theft. And now I will tell you this story, perhaps the most incredible and scandalous in the world of art. Leonardo da Vinci painted his Gioconda in 1505, more than 500 years ago. To this day, there is no unanimous opinion about who is depicted in the painting. One version claims that the painting represents his beloved Salai, dressed as a woman. This theory is based on the resemblance between Salai and the Gioconda, as well as on the fact that Leonardo left the painting to him as an inheritance. However, in recent times, art experts have agreed that the Gioconda is a portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of the Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo. Florence is the place where the Mona Lisa was born, and where she will return at the end of our story. After Leonardo's death, the painting was bought by the French king Francis I. He paid a fabulous sum for it at the time, 4,000 écus, approximately 1.5 kilograms of gold, which today would be worth around $100,000. That was the first price ever paid for the Mona Lisa. Francis hung the Gioconda in his favorite room at Fontainebleau, his bathroom. But this was not a sign of disrespect. The bathroom at Fontainebleau at that time was one of the most important places in France. There the king received ambassadors and entertained his lovers. 100 years later, Louis XIV moved the painting to Versailles, and only 300 years after its creation, in 1803, the Gioconda ended up in the Louvre, where Napoleon Bonaparte placed it 3 years later, after keeping it in his bedroom. From then on, the Gioconda remained in the Louvre for more than a century, until something unthinkable happened. An event that became the main topic of newspapers and rumors worldwide. On August 21, 1911, for more than half a year, the Mona Lisa disappeared from the Louvre. To better understand the events that followed, let me tell you about the world and France at the beginning of the 20th century. This will give you a fuller picture of what happened next. Let us begin with the Gioconda herself. Until 1911, the Gioconda was considered a masterpiece, but it was not very well known. It hung in the Louvre among other paintings, admired only by a small circle of art connoisseurs. At that time, ordinary people knew little about the Gioconda. No one in the world went to the Louvre specifically to see the Mona Lisa. At the beginning of the 20th century, tastes were different. People preferred the beauties of Raphael, Murillo, and Titian. For example, Raphael's Holy Family was valued 10 times higher than Leonardo's Gioconda, and the true star of the Louvre was Murillo's Assumption of the Virgin Mary. That painting attracted art lovers of the time to the museum. In those days, the halls of the Louvre were often half empty because of the small number of visitors. Ordinary Parisians could not afford to visit museums. They had other concerns. Even art experts at the time believed that the Mona Lisa was not Leonardo's greatest work. That honor was given to the Last Supper in Milan or Salvator Mundi, for which Salai, Leonardo's beloved, posed as a model. So let us begin our story on August 21st, 1911. On Monday, when the Louvre was closed, Louis Béraud, a French painter, planned to copy the Mona Lisa. It was common at the time for painters and students to copy works by great masters, either for practice or to sell to tourists. Béraud entered the room where the Gioconda hung around 8 a.m., but instead of the painting, he saw an empty space and iron nails sticking out of the wall. Annoyed, he complained to the museum staff, but they shrugged and said the painting was probably with the photographers. That, too, was common practice. At the time, digital photography did not exist, and each print was practically unique, used to produce postcards or brochures. Prints did not last long, so paintings were often taken down to be photographed again. To make the process easier, all paintings, even the most valuable ones, hung on ordinary hooks. That is why the staff did not attach much importance to the disappearance of the painting. They calmly went to find out who had taken it. Can you imagine that? At that time, museum employees could quietly remove any painting from the wall and take it wherever they needed, but neither the restorers nor the photographers could find the Gioconda. The guards became alarmed. However, as you can imagine, no one wanted to report to management that a national masterpiece had been stolen during their shift. So, several hours passed while they searched for the painting before informing the director. To make matters worse, the director of the Louvre, Théophile Homole, had publicly declared that it was impossible to steal anything from the museum. It would be like stealing the bell tower of Notre Dame Cathedral, he said. Soon he would be fired along with the entire Louvre staff. For now, the director could not believe the painting had been stolen, so he did not report the incident until the next morning, hoping it would still turn up and the matter could be covered up. Finally, the Louvre was closed. All employees were searched and questioned without success. That night, on a service staircase, a disturbing discovery was made. The frame of the Mona Lisa and the glass case that had protected it were found. Only then did it become completely clear. The impossible had happened. The Gioconda had been stolen from the Louvre. A terrible scandal erupted. The Louvre was closed for 2 weeks, and all Paris evening newspapers came out on Tuesday with sensational headlines on the front page. The Mona Lisa has been stolen from the Louvre. To understand just how phenomenal this theft was, we need to consider the world and France at the beginning of the 20th century. At that time, Paris was the global epicenter of art and culture. Just 20 years earlier, the World's Fair had been held there, for which the Eiffel Tower was built as an entrance arch, and then left standing in the middle of the city. The most talented artists, writers, and actors flocked to Paris, settled in Montmartre, and tried to change our perception of art. And the heart, center, and repository of Parisian art was the Louvre. Although many artists of the time, such as Picasso, considered museums to be tombs of art, the Louvre remained the storehouse of everything the French had gathered from the world through years of conquest and acquisition. In 1911, the Louvre was the largest, most coveted, and supposedly the most protected museum in the world. Therefore, the theft of the Gioconda sounded as if the moon had disappeared, unimaginable, terrifying, and wonderfully mysterious. Second, tensions were rising in Europe. Only 3 years remained until the outbreak of World War I. A spirit of distrust and suspicion prevailed. European countries had already divided into 2 camps: the Entente, which included France, Russia, and Great Britain, and the Triple Alliance, Italy, the homeland of our Gioconda, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. Any significant event in one of these countries was immediately perceived as an intrigue by one nation against another. Thus, The disappearance of the Gioconda immediately generated political speculation picked up by newspapers, further fueling the uproar. Third, the early 20th century was an era of technological revolution. The 1910s were the golden age of silent cinema, which became the most popular entertainment of the time. Just 10 years earlier, the Wright brothers had invented the first airplane. The first automobiles were beginning to replace horse-drawn carriages. About 30 years earlier, the first transatlantic telegraph cable had been laid across the ocean to America. For the first time in history, news could reach America in hours rather than months. Newspapers could now print photographs, allowing people to see what the people or objects mentioned actually looked like. Telephones began to appear in many homes, and although one phone per 250 people seems laughable by today's standards, at the time it revolutionized the world of gossip. Radio had already been invented, but would only become widespread a decade later. At that time, newspapers were the only mass medium. As a result, photographs of the Gioconda became almost the first truly mass image in art history, and gossip and speculation spread rapidly around the world. For the first time, this news spread globally thanks to the most modern inventions: telegraph, telephone, and automobiles. For 90% of people on the planet, the photograph of the Gioconda became the first and only painting they had ever seen in their lives, accompanied by such a scandalous story. And finally, no less important, these were very naive times. People did not have access to information as we do today. They learned all the news from newspapers and rumors. You have probably seen old silent films with exaggerated emotions where women faint dramatically or fall into the arms of cunning villains. People believed all of that. News was lived in this dramatic and emotional way at the crossroads between technological revolution and lingering superstition. That is why the theft of the Gioconda gave rise to a whole series of incredible theories that people genuinely believed. One theory claimed that the Gioconda had been stolen by a madman hopelessly in love with the portrait, who, having finally reunited with his beloved, would now cherish her and never return her to the world. Another version suggested that a secret society worshipped the Mona Lisa as a goddess and had long planned her theft. Now, in a secret refuge, they worshipped her, performed rituals, and made sacrifices. These were wild times, full of naivete, discoveries, and anxieties. But the most important thing is that at that precise moment, all factors converged at one point, and the theft of the Mona Lisa became a sensational bomb that shook the world in the blink of an eye. The press on both sides of the Atlantic exploded the very next day with shocking headlines about the theft from the most important museum in the world. The world went completely mad. Posters about the disappearance of the Gioconda were plastered all over Paris. For the first time in the history of the Louvre, lines formed. The museum was visited by 100,000 people in a single month, when the population of Paris was only 2 million. People went to the Louvre just to see the empty space. In fact, this was the world's first successful performance art piece, a non-existent painting. Comedians joked that the Eiffel Tower would be next. For a month, newspapers printed the Gioconda on their front pages. Songs about the Gioconda appeared and became popular, sung with irony. "You can't steal her, we always guard her, except on Mondays." The face of the Mona Lisa appeared in advertisements for everything from cigarettes to corsets. Newspapers suggested conspiracies involving Germany, allegedly stealing the Mona Lisa to humiliate France and demonstrate its weakness. Germany accused France of provocation. Both countries, on opposite sides, exchanged threatening notes. All of this was published in newspapers and spread by gossip in salons. Mediums rolled their eyes and foretold the end of the world due to the loss of our Madonna. People left flowers by the empty wall in the Louvre as if it were a cemetery and eagerly bought postcards of the Gioconda. That same year, 1911, up to 3 films about the Louvre theft were released, all of them hugely successful. In 1912, Paris organized a carnival in honor of the Mona Lisa. Can you imagine the commotion this story caused? No painting in the world before or after this event ever received such enormous publicity as the stolen Gioconda, and it only benefited from it. Meanwhile, the Paris police focused all their efforts on the search. French ports and Paris train stations were temporarily closed, and all ships, trains, and automobiles leaving Paris or the French coast were inspected. But because almost a full day passed between the theft and its announcement, some ships and trains had already departed. Paris police alerted destination countries to inspect incoming trains and ships. These were the first stirrings of what would later become Interpol. Even the transatlantic liner of the German Kaiser Wilhelm, which had suspiciously departed one day before the theft, was detained in New York Harbor and subjected to a thorough inspection a month later. Up to 60 police officers were assigned to the investigation. At their head stood a true legend of the time, a kind of French Sherlock Holmes, Alphonse Bertillon. The public had no doubt. If Bertillon took the case, it would be solved. Bertillon began work energetically. First, he interrogated all current and former Louvre employees and uncovered clue number 1. A Louvre employee had seen a suspicious man in a white smock on the service staircase on the day of the theft. The man complained that the door next to which he was sitting had no handle, and a maintenance worker opened it with his pliers. Bertillon showed the worker photos of Louvre employees, but he did not recognize anyone. The detective ordered a search of the area near the Louvre and found clue number 2, a door handle in a ditch. The picture of the crime became a little clearer, but still not enough. Then came clue number 3. A fingerprint was found on the remaining glass from the painting. Incredible luck. The meth. Florence, Italy, the birthplace of the Gioconda, Alfredo Geri, the owner of an antique shop, received a letter that said, "The real Gioconda is with me. I want to return it. Signed, Leonardo Vincenzo." The postmark indicated it had been sent from Paris. Geri, an experienced antique dealer, had seen many fraudsters pass through his shop. Despite not believing the letter, he replied and agreed to meet in Florence. Soon he received a second note from the mysterious Leonardo, proposing a meeting at the Hotel Tripoli, already in Florence. Geri brought Giovanni Poggi, director of the famous Uffizi Gallery, so that he could authenticate the painting. A man received them, invited them into a room, and from a wooden trunk with a false bottom beneath several belongings, took out a painting wrapped in red silk. The friends saw something very similar to the authentic Mona Lisa. Giovanni Poggi examined the painting and recognized it by the markings on the back and by a scratch left during a recent attack on the painting in the Louvre. Amazed, they realized they had the original in front of them. The thief asked for 500,000 lire for the painting, about $100,000 at the time, or 2.5 million today. We can see how the Gioconda's price was rising rapidly, even though the painting itself had not changed in the slightest. The friends persuaded the thief to entrust them with the painting while they gathered the money, but in reality they handed it over to the authorities. That same day the thief was arrested. When the identity of the thief became known, it caused another sensation. The thief was Vincenzo Peruggia, 32 years old at the time, the very craftsman who had built the glass case for the Gioconda, the same despised Italian migrant worker whose home police had searched so carelessly, the same ignorant macaroni eater who did not fit Bertillon's image of a refined criminal genius. Peruggia had kept the Gioconda for more than 2 years in a simple wooden trunk with a false bottom in a house just around the corner from the Louvre. You may ask, why didn't the fingerprints match? The answer may surprise you. Paris police made a fatal mistake and confused Peruggia's hands when taking his fingerprints after the incident with the prostitute. In the end, the left-hand fingerprint found on the glass was compared with Peruggia's right thumbprint. because Bertillon did not consider fingerprints important and collected them carelessly. Whether this happened by accident or intentionally, given Bertillon's aversion to fingerprinting, we do not know. It is quite possible that for the author of the Bertillon system, the idea that a competing method could help solve a crime was unbearable. Thus we see perhaps the most ironic situation in history, when the arrogance and snobbery of detectives prevented them from seeing the truth right under their noses. Finally, the thief was arrested. During interrogation, the cunning Perugia declared that he stole the Mona Lisa for patriotic reasons, claiming he wanted to return to his homeland a masterpiece stolen by Napoleon. And although this declared patriotism did not align well with the reward he demanded for the Gioconda, we know that the painting had been legitimately purchased from Leonardo da Vinci. Nevertheless, all of Italy admired the feat of a true patriot. If you remember how Italians were treated in France, this reaction is not surprising. All Italian newspapers published photos of the handsome Perugia, and Italian justice refused to extradite him to France. 7 months later, Perugia was tried, amid great sympathy and affection from the Italian public. The judge took into account Perugia's dubious patriotism and sentenced him to only 1 year in prison. His lawyers immediately appealed, and the sentence was reduced to 7 months, which Perugia had already served. Thus, the infamous thief was released directly in the courtroom, having almost entirely avoided punishment for the most notorious crime in art history. Years later, he would return and live the rest of his life in France. After restoration, the painting triumphantly returned to France after being exhibited in Florence, Rome, and Milan. The Hotel Tripoli, where the thief had stayed, was renamed Gioconda. The press unleashed a new wave of hysteria over the painting. Night excursions to the Louvre were organized for Parisian workers, but they turned into devotion to a single painting. People no longer wanted to see anything else. Thus, the Mona Lisa became a superstar, and since then the Louvre has been the most visited museum in the world. How did an ordinary worker manage to commit such an incredible crime? How could he steal a masterpiece from one of the most guarded museums in the world? You won't believe what I'm about to tell you. Perugia, familiar with the Louvre, knew that on Mondays there were no visitors, little security, and few employees. He took a white employee's smock and hid in one of the many storage rooms on Sunday, the day before the crime. On Monday at 7 a.m., Perugia quietly left the storage room and went to the hall with the Gioconda unnoticed. No one was there. At that time, a single guard watched 2 or 3 rooms at once, and on Mondays, staff was reduced even further. Guards frequently left their posts to smoke, drink tea, or chat. The Louvre was almost empty. Perugia removed the painting from the wall without difficulty, along with the frame and glass case, covered it with his smock, and exited via the service staircase, the safest route. There he removed the protective glass, leaving a fingerprint and the frame behind, and hid them on the staircase. He went down to the first floor to exit the building, but found the lobby door locked. Fortunately, he had a screwdriver and began removing the door handle. Then footsteps were heard upstairs, and Perugia sat on the steps, covering the painting with his smock. The repairman came down, the same one who later reported seeing a strange man on the staircase. Perugia complained that the door had no handle. The repairman opened it with his pliers and let Perugia into the hall. All that remained was to pass the old veteran guard, but there was no one at the post. The thief calmly exited the Louvre, threw the door handle into the nearest ditch, and carried the Gioconda to his small apartment 200 meters from the Louvre, where it would remain for 2 full years, right under the noses of Paris police. During interrogations, Perugia said that until the very last second, he hesitated over which painting to take. At first, he planned to steal Venus and Mars by Montigny, but in the end, he chose the Gioconda. And do you know why? Yes. Because it was the smallest painting in the room. 57 by 77 centimeters. Imagine for a moment that a completely different painting was just one thought away from becoming the world's greatest art superstar, a place now occupied by the Gioconda. And this decisive choice was not made by museums, galleries, or art experts, but by a simple Italian migrant worker who chose what was easiest to carry. Today, the Gioconda has its own room in the Louvre. It is housed in a special protection system that includes bulletproof glass, a complex alarm system, and equipment to create an optimal microclimate for preservation. The cost of this system alone is $7 million, now protecting a painting once bought by Francis I for 70 times less. In addition to the theft, there were several attacks on the Mona Lisa in 1956. One visitor splashed acid on the painting, and on December 20th of the same year, someone threw a stone at it, damaging the area near the elbow. After these incidents, the Mona Lisa was placed behind bulletproof glass. However, in 1974, during an exhibition in Tokyo, a woman attempted to spray paint onto the canvas. And on April 2, 2009, a Russian woman, our compatriot, who had not obtained French citizenship, threw a ceramic cup at the glass, at least without tea. In 1962, the Mona Lisa was insured for $100 million, equivalent to about $800 million today. The museum claims the painting is no longer insured because it is priceless, as it is impossible to insure something without a price. That sounds very nice. However, rumors say that there is indeed insurance, amounting to the fantastic sum of $2.5 billion. Thus, as a result of the random choice of a simple Italian worker, the value of the Gioconda increased 2.5 million times. I hope you enjoyed this story. Next time we will discuss Malevich's Black Square. You will need only 20 minutes to finally understand whether that cosmic blackness people talk about is really there, or whether it is something else entirely. It will be interesting. Like, subscribe, and above all, comment. What do you think? Does the value of the Mona Lisa lie in her smile, or in the uproar she caused at the beginning of the last century?